Hello and welcome. My name is Rodrigo Ferrari Nunes, and I'm a social and cultural anthropologist. In this video, I'm returning to a period in September and October 2012 when I was about to start the ethnographic fieldwork upon which my PhD dissertation is based. I conducted my fieldwork in the Shetland Isles. It's 60 degrees north in northern Scotland. This series will focus on the things that happened, the people I met, and stories that developed in the period between October 2012 and October 2014 and how I made sense of it. Only a tiny fraction of the material I've collected made it into the PhD dissertation. The music videos and interviews that you can find so far are collected at www.shetlandspree.com. These images are from the time I had just started experimenting with video and editing. This was an important period because it led me to realize eventually that I needed to upgrade my equipment, especially if I was going to document a music scene. Here I'm going from Edinburgh to Aberdeen after a summer living in a yoga studio in Mallorca to defend my first fieldwork proposal in a panel at the University of Aberdeen. I had no idea that I was going to be told that I could not start my fieldwork yet because the proposal wasn't ready, according to the panel of professors. I was on the right track, but I had missed some fundamental sources, such as Irving Goffman's PhD dissertation and other works derived from his experiences in Shetland, which became very important for my research. Doing research at the Shetland Archives, a cultural treasure trove, which collects all dissertations ever written about Shetland and much more, I finally came up with a whole new proposal that the same panel accepted very quickly. In this scene, we're watching the students who flocked to the University of Aberdeen Library, and we're waiting for the Queen of England to arrive to inaugurate this library. People waited hours in the rain just to catch a glimpse of the Queen, and many of them were not even local. They were international students. Now I'm coming back to the hotel by bus at night, about to go to Shetland for the first time and rethink my entire fieldwork proposal paradigm in light of Goffman's research. I will be on the ferry on the next day, a 12-hour ride northward in the North Sea. The ferry stops in Kirkwall, Orkney, around midnight and follows to Shetland, arriving early in the morning. After I boarded the ferry, I heard my name being called in the speakers. In the months before, while I was looking for an apartment, I exchanged emails with a local musician and now ambulance driver, Marie Williamson. Her son, Joe, was going to be on the same ferry. He had lost an arm to cancer, so he was allowed to use a much larger cabin and invite anyone, and he invited me, and I joined him. One of my supervisors, Andrew, who lived in Islay for his fieldwork, which is an island in western Scotland, recommended taking the ferry instead of a plane because the ferries are social places and a 12-hour trip would give me a better sense of the distance. I was trying to be poetic with the images, even though my camera was far from ideal. In the cabin, I was busy taking notes on Goffman's dissertation facsimile, which I hope nobody would recall to the library. I did not know at the time that the Shetland Archives were so organized and complete, and that the archivists, Brian Smith and Angus Johnson, were so incredibly helpful and knowledgeable. Once in Lerwick, I was met by both Marie Williamson, who was there to pick up her son, and the caretaker of the apartment I would be renting. Since I had not paid for my first month's rent yet, I had to spend one night at the local hostel, Islesborough House, which at the time was considered one of the best hostels in the world, for good reason. It's better than many hotels I've seen. The staff was super nice, and since it was the off-season, put me in a room by myself. The only reason I was in Shetland was to finish my new proposal at this time. I would return to Brazil in December to see my family and come back to Shetland in late January to begin my fieldwork. One thing that I was right about already in 2012 before going to Shetland was that there was a lot of research that focused on fiddle music alone, and that there was a need to expand the scope of research and include other instruments, instrumentations and styles which are alive in Shetland and integrated with the traditional music scene. I took walks around town to get a feel for the game, started taking pictures and experimenting, and soon I was already in my flat, and this is the view I would have for the next year. I was at Mount Hooley Place up the lane, and it was just a quick walk away from the Shetland archives, where I would come every day to do research until I finished my fieldwork proposal, which was still many all-nighters away. I was slowly falling in love with the place. There was so much space, so little traffic, and it seemed so slow at first, while I was still not yet involved with the music community. And this would change dramatically. Before I left, I was involved with so many things I could barely keep track of them, and I had to get started writing my dissertation. So that's why I left, otherwise I would have stayed. Knowing that my research was going to focus on music, Marie Williamson told me that the person I should meet was Norman Wilmore. That was the first young musician that she mentioned. This will turn out to be very significant as we move through the story. She invited to drive me to Walser and see Alan Tulloch play the fiddle at the Walser Bolting Club. Alan Tulloch is an elder and fiddler originally from Yale, who has resided in Walser for a long time. Anthropologist Anthony Cohen, who is based at the University of Edinburgh, mentions Alan Tulloch in his book about Walser. Cohen claimed that Alan helped to keep the Walser fiddle tradition alive at the onset of a supposed threat to local traditions posed by rock and roll, country and western, and other musical styles. As it turned out, Cohen was completely mistaken, and there was no such threat at all. To begin with, Alan is not from Walser. We know from Patrick Sheldon Shaw's work in the 1940s that throughout the history of music in Shetland, people have looked for inspiration in musics from outside. The iconic Shetland guitar player Piri Woolley himself was a lover of popular musics of his time, which originated abroad. Django Reinhardt's gypsy jazz approach inspired him to create a new way of playing traditional music on guitar that would eventually become an iconic Shetland way of playing traditional Scottish music. There is actually an amalgamation of rhythms and styles from all over the world that many musical Shetlanders welcome, and they incorporate that into their own original music. That does not mean that they turn their backs on their own traditions. So, differently from what Cohen claimed, rock and roll, country and western, and other styles are welcomed as complementing what there is in Shetland, and Walser, as it turns out, is a rock and roll central. It is now Friday, the 12th of October 2012, and I'm heading to the Cullival Hall to watch Alan Tulloch and friends play. I remember looking at the landscape and thinking, it's so barren and empty. Which is interesting because it's the opposite of what people are. But the more you discover these landscapes, the more they become part of you. The wind, the heather, the cliffs, the birds, in your mind and heart become louder and start merging and melting with the landscape and those places. And this, combined with the warmth and the upbeat open-heartedness of people together, is a very attractive combination, especially for a foreigner like me who grew up in one of the world's biggest cities. When you're from a city like São Paulo, you barely look at the sky. It's always cut by the buildings towering up. But here in Shetland, the sky is always spectacular. The lights, the colors, the clouds. And here we are storming the ferry on the way back from Kolleville to the Islesborough Community Centre in Lerwick. People get off the bus, take over the ferry, and just start dancing away. Here we see Sandy Leggett playing his accordion in the bathroom. He's an incomer who moved to Shetland and who only comes out with his accordion when festivals are happening. This group here is made up of people of all ages, including some older folk who I did not expect could dance like this. Turns out that storming the ferry is a typical tradition when festival goers ride back from country halls to Lerwick. As soon as the ferry approaches the mainland, people run back to the bus and head to Islesborough Centre in Lerwick, where the music keeps going until early morning. This is quite mild compared to what happens during the Shetland Folk Festival. The Accordion and Fiddle Festival is smaller, but very lively and interesting too. Even though there are only 23,000 people in Shetland, there are many festivals year-round, and each provides a different experience. But they're all incredible. The most important common feature is that they're all about community, spending the night, playing music together, sharing a really good time. This is the next day at the harbor, which was very nice, so I took some photos of boats and headed back to the Accordion Fiddle Festival for the final dance at the Click-Em-In Centre, the largest venue in town. It's a sports center that can be converted into a concert hall, essentially. Making music together and enjoying each other's company is a cultural practice that goes back many generations in Shetland, and you can experience that in every local festival. These festivals are all about community, like I said, and they do bring you into the world of Shetlanders. And that's what happened to me. I got more and more involved, documented a lot of events, and now I miss it. I hope you enjoy coming along with me in this brief journey back in time to the beginning of this long fieldwork experience, and that you can join me in future episodes. We have gigs, interviews, and all kinds of situations to cover. This is Rodrigo signing out, and I see you next time.